Sam, huge congratulations on
Thank
both
you.
of these exhibitions. I love them, and they're both so different and really give a lot of context to your work. And in New York, it's a big moment.
It was a lot.
It really is.
Yeah.
So as mentioned, I got to know your work when I was a curator at Yale between 2010 and 14, and had the privilege of bringing your work into the collection. And now years later, the reason kind of why I'm here is we're working together on a project in Buffalo to bring Sam's sculpture Doors for Doris, which initially debuted as part of the Public Art Fund in Doris C. Friedman Park. Can I see like a show of hands who got to see that work in person? Amazing. That's good. That's a good group. It has now become part of our collection at the Buffalo AKG, and we're preparing to install it in collaboration with a new 100-acre city park designed by Michael Van Volkenburg that's at the waterfront between where the Buffalo and Niagara Rivers meet Lake Erie. Any museum acquisition has the opportunity to really become kind of a long-term relationship with an artist. So I'm here because I'm a fan of your work, and because I'm really honored that our museum is embarking on this project where Sam's work is going to become a really permanent and recognized part. And I think obviously it's going to become a beloved part of the fabric of our city. For those who might know, it's relevant kind of how poignant this is that Sam made this work, and I brought a picture. Hold on, in case anyone hadn't seen it.
We can pass it around.
This is the detail image of Doors for Doris. So this is 60,000 pounds of marble. I think it was 9 flatbeds.
It's 90,000 pounds.
Sorry, 98,000. The registrars would be correcting me. And then that's kind of an outside view of it. That doesn't quite give as much of a sense of the grandeur, because when you're up close to it is when you get the feeling. And this is something she made by sourcing marble from sites all over the city. So it's repurposed material that she kind of worked together in this sort of rejected fragments, even becoming part of a new whole. I'm convinced that people, and then I will stop with this long preamble, but I'm convinced that people in Buffalo are going to have a really special opportunity to see their own fragmented selves metaphorically united in sculpture. And it seems to me, and I've been saying this ever since we decided to work on this project, I think it's a perfect place for two imperfect people to get married and aspire to form a union that, like this sculpture, preserves all the different histories that brought them together and that makes a passage between one world and the next. So this is like my way of just thanking you so much.
Thank you so much for saying yes.
Yeah. We're really honored to be working together on this. Okay, so now this is a shout out for Scout in the audience. In her thoughtful essay about your current show at the Hill Art Foundation, Scout Hutchinson described your, quote, engagement with abstraction as a kind of dream logic. And I loved that observation. You have in your work heavy materials that seem to levitate. You have canvases that create portals. And I wonder if I could ask you to talk a little bit about your relationship with this kind of dream logic. This kind of dream logic that she described. We're always sort of like questioning our dreams. You wake up from a dream and you think, what does this symbolize? What did I really think? Do you think that suspicion is a good way to approach abstraction? Is dream logic a good way to describe your work? Yeah.
I think, yeah, and I also think that dreams are a version of ready-made in a way where they're collecting all of this data from our lives and then sort of putting it through a filter that removes all assumption and understanding of what those things actually are. And so in a similar way to take materials that are so familiar to us, like a marble countertop that you made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on, and you feel like you understand that material and know it and sort of take it for granted in your daily life, and then display it in a way to where it's defying its character. And in that way you have to think more deeply about it materially. Or you can just accept it. Like, right. I feel like there's different ways to approach dream logic, which is just sort of enjoying the ride and accepting it and thinking about like larger picture or meaning, or there's the sort of didactic taking it apart and analysis version. And I think if you could bring either of those are acceptable, the middle is acceptable, anything's acceptable, because any engagement is great.
Yeah.
You know, so.
With abstraction, so much, I think the typical approach is to come at it analytically. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, not to utter the kind of S word, but there is sort of a surrealist quality when we're talking about dream logic, and that's very seldom brought to bear on abstraction.
Absolutely, and I think that the thing about surrealism is that it's making you confused about something you think you understand. It's taking an environment that you have assumptions about and understand, and then tricking it or creating a little moment of illusion or confusion that is pulling you more into the piece. And I think that it ends up being a space where you can have curiosity or you can let go and enjoy. And I think that it's all, depends on the person, but it's engagement either way. And I think there's also a lot to be said for just pleasure and letting go and releasing to the experience of seeing something. And so I think if you go too deeply into like supporting and explaining and, guiding the analytical perspective, you can deprive the instant emotional, empathic interaction with the work. So I think that has to be a choice versus like an obligation in a work.
And then we'll proceed from like asking you to unpack and analyze these works a little bit.
Absolutely.
I think, and Scout hit on it in her essay, but there is a quality of almost like a ship in a bottle about some of these works, of feeling that you can't kind of help but approach them with a sense of wonder,
right?
Which unmoors us a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really, I think, a key factor to the success of the work.
I appreciate it. I think that wondering how something came to be is a great way to engage with something. But it can't be like the sole source. You can't, otherwise it's just like a science trick. But yeah, I want them, the way that I make these works is very personally performative. It's a very engaging in the moment act, and I think I want that energy to be withheld in them, but to have that energy expressed in something so stable and heavy, it creates one of those moments of contradiction that gives a little energy. It gives a little like questioning, and I just want everything to like be two polars, and then we meet in the middle and we have a question and we're interested and we're pulled in. And I really sometimes I think that I'm a type of person where I can really appreciate something and in my own stupidity have zero interest in why or how it exists, but still feel very connected to it. Like, I am not a geologist. I don't care about astronomy, but I love a night sky. There's a lot of things that I feel so drawn to visually, but I sort of lack the desire for specific understanding because it takes away my own personal subjective interaction with it. Like, I don't need more information. The experience is enough for me, and it keeps it sort of personal in between me and the thing that I have feelings about.
When we see an exhibition like this one or the Hill Art Foundation show, we're seeing your experimentation with a lot of different materials. So there's not just paintings, not just stained paintings, there's paintings with marble, there's marble sculpture, there's stained glass in quotes, there's installation. And I think it's really interesting to see the way that you're kind of cross-pollinating these materials. It was also evident to me that you're kind of approaching material choice not from a formal perspective, or not solely from a formal perspective. And you're speaking a little bit about that kind of like empathic response to the material, but there's also kind of a conceptual approach.
Yeah, I have a great love for the poetics of the everyday, and I've always been very drawn to and attracted by works that elevate that, and I decided to just break it down more as art supply than have it be like an actual representation of a can of beans or whatever. But I think that, I was raised in a very like labor heavy Midwestern style family, but very into the poetics of that spirit of like the working person and the beauty of the everyday. And I think that sort of got interjected into the timing I had when, like Rachel Harrison was coming up, and there was all these like amazing artists that were using everyday objects.
Speaking of the can of beans.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, oh, it's like my two worlds combining, because I always felt like I had a foot in two different worlds. I had a foot in sort of this like labor union world, but my parents were also artists, and so it's very rare that those two things combine. And then I just sort of magically landed studying art in like the early 2000s, when that was really what was happening. And so I began just emulating that, because that's what any young person does. And then through just years of working, I sort of came out to myself as like this more sort of formal person. Like I wanted this more control over the material and to express sort of like these forms and shapes that I wanted, but I still needed the materials to be grounded in some kind of meaning and have some kind of relationship to our lives and our everyday. So the surround in these paintings is plaster. Mm-hmm. So I also like the duality of these materials, where the stone is the original art supply. It's the pietà. It's like, you know, the gorgeous landscape. It has so many timelines within it. But then it's also the countertop, the bathtub, the hotel lobby, you know. And then plaster, also a dual art supply, where it's like, we're talking frescoes, we're talking like all these amazing sculptures, but we're also talking just walls.
Right.
Straight
well,
up building
the material of the copy too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, so speaking about art history training and kind of coming up, so you included works by Jasper Johns, Robert Gober, Isma Noguchi, Liz Glynn in your show, the kind of your Hill Art Foundation exhibition, and why? I guess this is maybe a question about sources, maybe a question about inspiration, but I also think that there's something about proximity that maybe is about the intentionality of how you'd like these works of yours to be seen. I think most artists invited for a solo exhibition are going to take the opportunity to show as many of their own works as possible. Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting choice, and I just wanted to ask you more about sort of why this sort of atypical choice. What was it about the proximate relationship that you were trying to get across in the show? And I have some speculations. Actually, I want to hear you though.
There's multiple answers to that question.
You could even pick one of them.
But I
no,
think...
like one artist. I mean,
I was like, okay, let me edit.
No.
The overarching idea was recontextualizing my work to sort of help explain some of these ideas in the background that I think that I haven't really given an audience, or an audience hasn't had an opportunity to know unless they spoke to me or came to my studio or miraculously knew the 20-year arc of my own career. Like, so it's just an opportunity to have a direct context with work that I think can sort of help explain sort of more of the breadth of like why the materials, what's happening, the duality within the work. And then it was also an opportunity to just collaborate with heroes of mine and sort of write a story. I'd never really gotten an opportunity to do that before, and a big part of my approach to art is fandom. I'm just a huge fan, and so to have to have Gober and Jasper Johns and Noguchi. The show was really based around the Noguchi. We found out about the Noguchi, and then I sort of like... There were a lot of problems to solve in the show, and problem solving is...
Tell us more.
Okay, so it's like... It's not like, okay, do whatever you want. You have a PDF of works available, so you have to choose from the PDF. I had certain works I needed to show of my own. I wanted to bring that very large painting from the parish. So then we had to deal with having a 20-foot painting in the show. I needed to have the Dudonné works in the show. Right. I needed to... These
are the new, like, laid paper print work.
Yeah, exactly. So the Dudonné work needed to be integrated. I needed the large painting in the show. I had to select from the available works in the PDF. And then I also... Tom had certain works, he wanted to show works that were in his collection, which was actually wonderful because then you can sort of see like progress over 10 years of my career. And because I started as an artist that loves to, take ready-mades or really respond to things that already exist, it was a fairly natural experience for me to be like, okay, here's all the problems I have to solve, and then I have to create a solution with the existing options that are here and move all these spaces. And there's just so many layers to it for me, which is like, I just a huge fan of Noguchi. Noguchi's inspired my work so much. Jasper Johns was the first artist, Kathleen and I are both from Chicago, and the Art Museum of Chicago was one of the first museums I spent time in, and that was one of the first examples I saw of a painting being a sculpture, and a sculpture being painted, and that sort of cross-pollination. And so this is like work that really influenced me. Gober was someone I came to later, but what amazing, talk about like duality of material and dream space and identity being shown through sort of like complicated subtle representations of the everyday. It's like, it was, you know. And then Liz Glenn, it's like, those works are made the same way my work is made, just in a completely different, the physical result is completely different, but the math is the same. In the way we're like, okay, we're taking this object that exists and we're just rendering a completely different material. And then all of a sudden you're like questioning what you know about a tumbleweed and elevating a tumbleweed and thinking about the physicality of a tumbleweed because it's just being represented. All that's been changed is how what it's made
like
out
what's
of.
rendered. And
Yeah.
I mean, each of these artists who are making materials do things that you wouldn't expect them to do in some way or another, as is your work.
Yes. And then there's also the opportunity for like collaboration. So with the Noguchi, I did this large paper screen and the light comes through and then there's a patterned light on top of the Noguchi, and so it's a little like post-mortem forced collaboration. Or like the pink light that gets cast on the Jasper Johns from the brick window. It's like, these are just moments where I'm sort of like quietly shaking the hands of heroes of mine in the show.
I love that. I like also the way you're shaking hands with them is through this very soft, very subtle kind of conversation that is like about adjacency in some way.
Yeah,
you're shading them.
And the Hill Foundation is like a very neutral space in the way that it's so modern and clean lined, but it was condos. Like it has sort of a feeling of like this could have been a domestic space.
Yeah.
And so with all of the little nooks and separate rooms, you can kind of create this like, you know, when I think about the brick window and then the Jasper Johns feeling sort of like a curtain, and then across is the sink. Sorry. Over sink. Sorry, I'm like inside the show in my head right now. It really feels, it's like hinting at home.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's impossible.
This is, I guess, to another unhome-like space, a very beautifully renovated and installed commercial gallery where we're sitting. This is maybe a good segue to ask about architecture, kind of maybe a touch more broadly in your work. So I was thinking back, actually, while I was thinking about this talk, to an installation that you did at Joan in Los Angeles, like 10 years ago, give or take, 8 years ago. And that was a kind of a screen that she created, and there were projections. I mean, it really altered. It was very much an architectural intervention. Similarly, like you've done that at the Hill Foundation. And then I know here in this space, you designed the wall layout for this exhibition. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. And then you sort of grew up on movie sets.
Yeah.
Like your dad is in the film industry, and grew up with that as part of your upbringing, which is such an interesting formation, the falsehood, but it's not analogous to gallery spaces too. You know, everything is, we're all putting on a show.
Yeah.
But so could you talk a bit about architecture, maybe outside of the Hill, but it could be here, kind of how you think about architecture in relationship to your work?
Absolutely. Well, I think that art is an engagement with architecture. It's hanging on the walls, it's existing in space, and so it's a relationship. There's two things at play, and responding to the architecture just is a way of like reminding you that you're in a specific place. And it's a little, I'm always trying to sort of like eliminate the white cube while also honoring the white cube. Like, how do I give the work space for the viewer to just engage with the work, but then also have some awareness of where they are. And some spaces like require me like a real intervention with them, where they just start begging for some kind of interaction. And then, you know, a gallery space is supposed to be about neutrality, and with this show I did the wall build out based on not wanting to feel obligated to think about specific scale for every single work in the show. So basically, usually this is a large open room, and I have a desire to have, like, my instinct is uniform. Like, I want everything to be the same size. I want there to be, like, a feeling of peace when you walk into a space. And I didn't want everything to be, like, whatever wild sides they would be if they were all together in one room. And I wanted every piece to feel like it was the scale it needed to be. And I also wanted the viewer to be able to experience individual pieces, but then in relationship to other pieces, but not be overwhelmed with all of them at the same time. And so architecture is an incredible tool to kind of control the viewing experience. And in a neutral environment like this, the architecture is the support to the art, where sometimes the art is the support to the architecture. But yeah, that was the goal with these walls, is that I wanted every piece to sort of have its own space, and then very specific relationships with which other artworks you were seeing at the time with each work.
More on space. I was, in American art history, we kind of date almost when a work was made in relationship to the spaces in which it could be shown. So mid-century American abstract painting, it never got larger than what you could fit in Betty Parsons, but it pushed it to the limit. And so when galleries were in Midtown, it was kind of Midtown scale. Then you have the loft movement in the 70s, works start getting bigger. And then you have institutions kind of trying to respond to catch up with what is studio space.
Yeah.
But for you, what's interesting, I think whatever studio you were ever in, your limiting factor is not so much an architectural limiting factor, it's your body.
Yeah.
Because everything you make, and I don't know if everybody knows this, I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, sort of everything you make is made by you, and is also carried, like you're carrying it, it has to be something that you physically can do, which builds your, like the measure of you as opposed to the measure of a commercial space or a museum space or even a working space like a studio. It's the measure of you that is built into these works.
Yeah, and that's another illusion of scale, I think, where these pieces can seem so heavy and so large and monumental, but actually it's geometry and intuitive math and everything. Every single stone is within a realm where myself and one other person can move it. Even with Doors for Doris, like a 90,000-pound sculpture, it was made in the big portions of it.
Just gonna hold this up again.
Not the huge stone surrounds, but like the patterns of stone within it were laid out in my studio by hand. So I really try to keep everything within a handmade realm and a scale to my own body, so that I don't want to lose the direct relationship to the material. This is the type of work that could very easily be like put into CAD and CNC'd out and fabricated. And I think one of the most important qualities is the one-to-one relationship between the maker and the stone. And I have studio fabricators. I have people that help me so much because there's so much sanding and cutting and labor in these works, and I would make like 2 a year if I made them by myself. And honestly, I'm just not as good at it as some other people. But every single stone is arranged by me. I paint them. It's my work. And I don't want to farm it out. And I think that the handmadeness of it just builds its character. It's like how the line quality is created. It's how all of the unpredictability is put in there.
Yeah, I think there's a practical way to how they're made and how your body gets in that way, but there is also something extremely human about them, I think, probably because of that, the irregularity of them and the fabricatedness. I just think, I think one could easily make this work at not just on a digital, with the digital fabrication means, but also the scale could go as big as the site. But because of the means that you're dedicated to, there is always going to be this kind of sourcing, cobbling, collage quality to it that has a tabletop relationship and then a sort of a verticality and a horizontality.
Yeah, and then also like a relationship to abstract expressionism, in the sense where like one of the things I have always pulled from abstract expressionism is the understanding of time and physicality in them, and I feel very connected to how they were made and the experience of the artist making them, and sort of like the length of an arm, the energy of a stroke, and you feel invited into the room of its creation. And I'm always sort of trying to like capture that in the stone, where it's like the same energy, the same movement, like the viewer is invited into the experience of the actual moment of creation with these works. They're not so like mathed out that there's a boundary there.
I think that's a really nice balance, though, talking about kind of the magic trick quality of it. There's also this invitation, and it's not just about like aporia, or just wonder in front of it.
Yeah.
I was also, so thinking about plant life, I was thinking about how much cut flowers are sort of a staple of the Dutch 17th century Vanitas tradition. My favorite things in Vanitas paintings are like bubbles, because they remind you that, bubbles, musical instruments, and notes and books are all there to remind you of the fleeting vanity of the pleasures of life.
The bubbles is also just them showing off.
Because they could paint them?
Yeah.
Right. And then you've also got skulls and overripe fruit, which are there to remind you that you're going to die. I mean, that's the point of all of Vanitas. And when we were talking about this show, you said something, I wrote down. You said, we pay for perspective through decay. You can't grow without the pain of a life lived. And your plant reference in many of these works can kind of act as analogs for a life cycle. When we see a plant, one can think of them frozen in time, but plants are never frozen in time. They're living and dying. So in this exhibition, with these works, with these plants, where are we in that life cycle, kind of on the spectrum of growth and decay?
Well, I was thinking that we're sort of at our peak where we're about to die.
Cool.
So I was thinking like real midlife moment.
Yeah.
But, like that's the sort of glory of a flower. It's like the moment it's the most beautiful is like moments before it starts to decay, it starts to go down. And I was just listening to a podcast the other day. I listen to sometimes these really weird podcasts, and they were saying that the aliens, said that we, our problem is that we die too soon because we actually finally understand how to be in the world when we're older, and then we run out of time.
Couldn't that just be somebody's grandmother who said that? Why does it have to be
Citing my sources. Anyway, the aliens want us to live longer. Okay. But they don't want us to die, they want us to live longer. Anyway, it's just that, I am in a time of life where, like, I'm a mom, I'm having friends, I'm losing friends. Yeah. Not because I did anything wrong, because they're dying. It's like there is a lot of, the pain is starting to come in, in a very serious, unavoidable way. And there's a lot of cost to living. And I'm also feeling such gratitude and overwhelm and love. And I'm like more in love with the world and life than I ever have been in this moment of everything sort of being on fire and fucked up and like sorrow always like at the doorstep in a weird way. And I think that contrast, I know that contrast is what I was looking for in this work. Sort of that moment of reaching and falling apart at the same time.
Yeah, this level of beauty has a cost in some way or another.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I think I just have one more kind of question, and then we'll see if I have lots more I could ask, but I'll ask one more.
I'll do it all day.
A moment like this for any artist, when all of the art gets packed up and taken out of your studio, I know we have 2 shows, is kind of a return to zero, and we think about the writer facing a blank page. I have several artist friends who have the kind of horror of going back to the studio the night after, the studio day after an opening.
Yeah.
And you realize you have to start again instead of finishing something.
Yeah.
Are you giving yourself some time to kind of savor this moment, or is it a moment of anxiety? Are you on to the next thing? Does the emptiness of the studio bring you kind of joy or anxiety or both?
I think it's both. I have definitely had large moments of postpartum, and not with this show though. I don't know, I think that it was such a push to do both of these shows, and each one scratched such a specific itch that I was really grateful that I pulled them both off. I was really grateful that they were received so well, and I just feel really calm and understood with these shows in a way that I haven't felt before. Because I think that usually my postpartum stems from sort of, it feels for me, but it's like there are moments where you work so talking hard and feel like it sort of falls on deaf ears, or
probably the majority of them.
Thrown it into a void a little bit. And you know, a show always feels a little like a funeral. Like I no longer have control over the destiny of these things. But I think that it was such a big push that I felt a great relief, and then I feel so happy and honored that they're being received so well. And then also, like, you know, because I did such a big push, I have things I need to do. Like, I have to remember to go hang out with my kid and stuff.
Yeah.
But I am back to work. I'm sort of like tiptoeing back to work. Luckily, there's like demand, and I'm filling that demand. And I've also, you know, sort of problem solved my way into a space where it's pretty easy for me to re-enter my work. So,
well, this is key.
That's like, I set that up for myself.
In writing, I was always taught, like, if you're on a really good run, you should start a paragraph before you have to go to bed and end your day so that you know where to begin the next day.
Yes, exactly.
So you like left yourself toe holes in your paint, like in painting.
Yeah.
In your
when I came back to the studio the week after, and it was barren. It was a ghost town. We were all sort of like, like not quite knowing what to do. And now there's like work in motion. We've got stuff going, and it feels good in there.
Oh, congratulations!
It's not manic, but it feels good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cathleen. Thank you.
That was great. I think now it's time for a few questions and answers from this
Absolutely.
audience, but I just want to make an unpaid, non-commercial announcement. This beautiful monograph, the Sam worked very closely with us and Rizzoli Books on, which came out a year and a half ago. And if you don't have a copy, we have them available. But please take a look at it if you'd like at the front desk. So,
Thanks, Jackie. Does anyone have any questions, Jill? Here, I'll repeat your question.
Okay. Thank you. It's a really nice conversation. You didn't talk quite as much about the painterly field. I'm wondering, you know, I've been staring at it, and I really love the observation about these duality between something that is actual and real, the stone that you've displaced. But then, you know, it's sort of, that makes me think about the field as like the imaginary fictive space. And they're so resolved, right? And it made me wonder, how did you get there? Did you have other options, you know, gesture, color, texture? Like, how did you come to this particular?
Did everybody hear her question, or should I repeat it? Everybody okay? All right, go ahead.
Well, I've been making these works for 10 years, so they've evolved to this place. And they started at a very like essential, minimal space, and I've slowly been taking more and more control and bringing my hand in more. The idea behind the painting of this is that I was really thinking about Monet's late work, and the beauty of that being that as he was losing his sight, as we all know, that it really just became about light and this more essential rendering of what he was seeing without the fuss in a lot of ways, and the base of that being such a pure way to see the world in light. My father's a lighting designer. I was like raised to be very aware of light, and I think that it's something that I consider with every piece of work is how it's going to engage. And I think about that with architecture as well. It's just how is it going to engage with the light and the space of the world. And one of the ways that I think that these works engages with the viewer and the human body is that the stone is reflective of light, and that I've chosen this plaster that really absorbs light. And so as you move around the work, it really changes. And if you were in an environment that had natural light or directional light, the work changes depending on the time of day, the colors change. You know, every perspective you stand at, you're going to have a different visual experience. And so then it's engaging your body the same way a sculpture engages your body, as it changes as you move across and around it. So the mattness of it is the choice of light absorption in contrast to the stone bouncing light. And then the painting style is just me. And thinking about layers and depth and light, and a very pleasurable part of making it for me, and a response to the stone. The stone happens first, and then I respond to the stone with the paint and the color.
Can I ask, are the stones in place
when you started painting?
The stones are inlaid into the piece, and I look at it all together, but it's white, and then I remove the surrounds and I paint them because it's too fussy to paint around the stones. And then they all get glued together, and every once in a while I go back into them once they're all together.
Question?
You mentioned the word unpredictability, so I'm curious about what fascinates you about unpredictability.
Well, I like to respond to things versus being in control of everything, and I think that that's why I've chosen sculpture. I've chosen, the world is unpredictable, life is unpredictable, and it is the ability to sort of roll with it, or, it's also the thing with the ready-made. It's like, how do we look at this differently? How do we take what is already existing and then project our interests or incorporate it into a way that means something to us? And so I think that's why it seems so hard for me to just make a painting with paint where you're playing God the entire time. Like, the unpredictability is the magic for me because it gives me space to respond and do decision making. I studied photography, and I think that photography is such an important art form, and I've said this before in talks, but basically what I think is it's the ultimate way to understand how to make a composition. You have the entire world around you, and then you have to figure out a composition within a frame from the entire world. And it's actually one of the first exercises in experiencing ready-made into an art. Like, the existence of the world, now make an image, make an art image out of it. And it builds up a muscle of composition, it builds up a muscle of response, it builds up a muscle of editing. And the world is unpredictable. And so you have to keep those muscles in shape to bring those skills to whatever environment or whatever's going to happen. And so with the stone, I'm just breaking it with hammers and then responding to each shape and bringing them in and trying to find those relationships and connections. So in a lot of ways, I'm facilitating things that already exist and responding to them versus controlling.
Yeah, I see a lot of resilience in your work.
Oh, wow.
Other question?
What did she say?
She said she sees a lot of resilience in Sam's work. And Sam enjoyed that.
I enjoyed it. I took it in. I'm trying to accept compliments.
It's so funny. I've never thought of. I'm sure I'm like the 80th person to have thought of this. But when you talked about hitting the stone with a hammer, I all of a sudden thought about Matisse and the cutouts.
Yes.
Like just the way that you tear a piece of paper and you can, paper's going to do what it's going to do. It's organic in so many ways in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and and I think that bringing up Matisse is really lovely. But it's sort of like talking about how I'm using the same muscles in photography as I'm using in the paintings, and it's the same sort of idea I brought to the paperworks that I was doing, which is, or if I'm doing printmaking, like whatever I'm doing, I'm still bringing this sort of like sculpture, photo, drawing, painting. Like I'm thinking about light, I'm thinking about color, I'm thinking about structure, I'm thinking about the actual material that I'm working with. So with the paper, I was approaching it in a sculptural way where I'm building these layers, but I was thinking about modernist photography, and I was thinking about that first moment of like Stieglitz, Steichen, and Weston, like bringing in, close-ups of the city windows or the inside of a cabbage, and all of a sudden like thinking about photography as an expression of a fine art viewpoint. But in paper.
I think that these are such amazing prints. I mean, if we can call our edition paper works, or it's a really interesting medium for you to be working with.
Yeah, and it's also unpredictable because it's like, I don't know what the result's going to be, and that's another thing I love. Is I love a reveal.
Because you're kind of dealing with like a slurry.
I'm dealing with slop, and then I put it's on a screen, and then I'm, as a sculptor, taking negative space away, and some of them are up to 6 layers, so then that feels sculptural, but I don't know the actual math of where everything's going to land, so then and the material has its own way of like spreading and flattening and connecting with the layer beneath it, and so it has a ton of character and resilience of its own.
And also this incredibly interesting relationship to light, because like with laid paper you have a different like rays and cones, like it's reflecting light ever so subtly, but this all you have are these toothy absorbent bits of paper, so it's like plaster. I mean, it's really eating all the light when it hits it.
Well, also these pieces, I mean, we frame them, but the white parts are transparent and or translucent, so they almost can work like a stained glass in that way too.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you.